So I want a haunted house out on the moor. I want a full moon rising. And in this haunted house out in the moors, there's going to be this lighted window. And in the lighted window, we're going to see a man at work over a desk. And at his desk, we're going to see that he's writing in his journal. And in his journal, we're going to see what he's writing, which is on a dark and gloomy night. All right, do that in the first minute. I got some stuff right here. And, just let me know when you're done. If you get all that, I'll repeat it if you need it. But anyway, that's.
Hey, do the blue thing.
All right. God bless you for trying, but first you got, yeah, but I can't see the journal. I can't see what he's writing in the journal.
She's going to come do the blue thing.
Yeah.
Someone else.
All right. Is there anyone that hasn't gotten the mistake the writer made in this case, that he's perhaps asked for too much? Oh, thanks. He perhaps asked for a little too much in one channel. This is the kind of thing that, because as a writer, you can just say that. If you got a novel, you say, okay, it was a gloomy night. There was a house on the moors, and up in the house was a room, and in the room, we see through the window, there's writing in a journal, that it was a dark and gloomy night. And, you know, it takes up however much space on the typewriter, and it's done. It's like, it's an opening scene, and it's not much at all in the story. But in the comic book, you know, that's, you can do the house on the moors. You may be able to do the lighted window. If you have an extraordinary artist like Bernie Wright and stuff, you may even get the guy in the lighted window in the house on the moors hunched over his journal, but you're not going to be able to see what he's writing in the journal. So you've just asked for something impossible from your artist, and that's bad for two reasons. One, that you can't do it. I mean, it's just not possible. And two, forever after, the artist you're working with is going to be thinking, this guy's an idiot. He does not know how to write comics. And I'm going to start looking for a better writer to work with. Or like I did, which is, screw this, I can do better than this, I'm going to do it myself. Yes, sir?
Question. One thing I noticed when I understood the comics is that on the first pages, I give a lot of information because I want to give the artist an idea of what he wants to do. Then it goes down as the script progresses, because I think he got the established what I want. But perhaps what I'm saying now, perhaps I'm giving too much information at the beginning and too little, if there is such a thing as too little information.
Well, no, that's a good question, and we'll get to the nuts and bolts of it. I'll give you a brief. What you're describing is probably how it should work. For example, in our story here, we're going to mention that it's an old man with a wart on his nose, and he's missing one eye with a scar on it, et cetera, et cetera. And we'll eventually show why he looks like that, right? Well, the first time you describe it, the first time you bring him on stage, that's a metaphor, there's no stage, is there? The first time you bring him on stage, of course you have to describe him because your artist needs to know what he looks like. If the second time he shows up, you're still saying, remember that old man, the one with the hooked nose and the wart on his nose and the scar in his eye and all that kind of stuff? You know, the artist doesn't need it the second time. He knows what he looks like. He's got the description once. And the third and the fourth time, you write it and say, and remember, the old man has a scar. Then you know, you're just wasting your time and all that kind of stuff. So the natural progression is that scripts aren't going to be panel descriptions much fuller to begin with, and later on. Later on in the story, now that we've gotten to know this and you know your artist has drawn it many, many times, you know, you're going to have panel descriptions that say things like, they fight, or whatever. You know, that's it. 2 words, and you've earned as much money with those 2 words as like that novel length description you had to do for the first panel. Because I drew such a wonderful first page, we'll keep that, and we'll grab another volunteer. Anyone else want to be embarrassed? Because of course, you should know by now that I'm going to ask you again to draw something that you cannot possibly draw, right?
Right.
Okay, so this I'm not going to ask for a big battle. You know, I was hoping you'd pick a war picture because then I was going to have like an army of thousands coming over the hill, riding their chargers, and on the general we can see an expression, you know, and things like that, and describe each and every person and try to get you to draw it. But you guys picked forward. So now we have let's have an old-fashioned shoot 'em up, a noir gangster thing. And in the first panel, you see the villain, whoever you want to be the villain, pulling out his gun, shooting the hero falling dead, rolling over and dying.
Don't forget the black hat.
Okay. And this is, well, he works it out. The most common mistake that first-time comic writers do, which is a panel in a comic is just a moment in time, a frozen moment. We give the illusion of action, we give the illusion of progression, but it's really individual pictures. So if you're calling for cause and effect in the same panel, if you're calling for one action to occur and then another action happens as a result of that in the same panel, you're kind of calling for an impossibility. Not quite an impossibility, because as our stalwart artist here, what's your name? A.L.? As soon to be comic rock star A.L. is showing us, he got this impossible panel description, and he sort of did what artists have to do, which is, okay, he asked for more than I can actually draw, so I'm going to try and draw at least the one thing that shows most of that. And he's got the guy with the smoking gun, so we can infer as readers that the guy pulled the gun and shot the guy, because what we really see is the last thing I asked him. So, good job. Oh, it's in the Old West. Yeah. It's a Western. All right. So, thank you. Those things are the two greatest sins in a writer communicating to an artist. One, that you're asking for too much in one panel, that it would just take a Superman to be able to draw it all. And the other is you're asking for an impossible 2 or 3 panels worth in one panel. And sometimes you do that unconsciously because you have to think as an artist. An artist will think in terms of action happening and all this, but will hopefully have that skill of breaking it down into specific single static shots. As a writer, you have to kind of adopt that as well. You have to be able to know what you can show and what you can't show. This is not an exaggeration, by the way. So many comic strips do ask for things where the action and the reaction happen in the same panel, and even other things like, you know, after he dies and starts to rot, an old prospector finds the rotting body and finds the golden watch on the body, all in one panel, and it's just, you can't do that. And those are the absolute. I mean, everything else that we're talking about or going to talk about are just ways of perfecting those rules. So it's really only 5. Is it 5 rules? 3 rules of writing, which is keep it terse, keep it simple, kill your darlings is 1, and the other 2 are the other 2. And no, I'll and in thinking like an artist, you cannot ask for too much in a panel, and you cannot have more than one action in a panel. That said, you need to create the illusion of action. Comic books are a very motion, visual, exciting, everything's happening at breakneck speed medium, in the sense that you can suggest that happening. As a matter of fact, your job is to suggest that happening. There is, in every entertainment medium, a collaboration between author and reader, or filmmaker and audience member, or what have you. And that collaboration is, here's what the writer has to do, he's the writer. Here's what the reader has to do, and they each have their own areas of responsibility. If you're a deft enough writer, your reader is going to take his job, or be able to do his job, which is to fill in the thing. If we had this same situation, what do you do? We got the villain that shot the guy, and he's lying dead. And if we, in the next panel, you're about to find out that my stick figure drawings are the worst stick figure drawings in the world. All right, so he's still dead, and we still have the horizon with somehow the cactus fellow is falling in. But in the next panel, we have got the guy dead, and we have our villain riding over the horizon on his horse. We just told a sequential story. He shot the guy, he got on his horse, and he's ridden away. We have not shown you all sorts of things. Obviously, he put his gun away. Obviously, he got on his horse. He had to find his horse because it didn't exist. It was probably off handle somewhere. And, mount up and ride away. All of that stuff we left out because all of that stuff is part of the reader's responsibility to fill in. And even movies where you get to see most of the stuff that happened relies on that too. I mean, if this were a movie and you see the bad guy shoot the good guy, and the next thing you see is a quick cut to a horse disappearing over the horizon, riding hellbent for leather, probably as an audience member, you're not going to stand up and demand, well, this sucks. They never explained how he got on his horse. Audience members, readers, can figure that kind of stuff out, and should. There is the reader, the audience member responsibility. It is a collaboration. The story's not told until you've both done your part, and there should be an expectation for they can do their part. I'm kind of an old fart. I was there at the dinosaur beginnings of computer gaming when it was all text games. Does anyone remember the things like Zork, I think, and stuff that was all just text things that then you have to, it's a dark and stormy night, and the detective hears a scream out in the hall, and what do you do? And then you have to write something in, and they have like a primitive interface that will recognize certain keywords to see if you've done what the story wants you to do. And I did one of those. I used to like them. But it was a murder mystery kind of thing where I was in my den. I was a tough, hard-boiled private eye, and I heard a scream in the hall, and I said, "What do you do?" And I run into the hall, and it says, "No, there's an error." Or however they said that, that doesn't work. I'm going. I look into the hall, and I'm looking for those keywords or whatever. And I get this system of, no, that doesn't work, that doesn't work, that doesn't work. And finally I get this snarky little thing, you never got out of your chair. You sons of bitches, pardon my earthy language. That was, these stupid game designers who are not writers thinking that the reader, or in this case the gamer, is not capable of doing his part of the story. And it's my favorite example. It's just, the sounds issuing from my house at that moment were terrible to behold. And that's pretty much the time I found out that I was one of those guys, much like my father, that will talk back often screaming to the TV when ridiculous stuff occurs, or books or what have you. Because that was just an absolute cheat on the implied contract between author and readers. Like you don't jerk them around like that. You don't have a story where you know, we would have that same scene in a prose story and say, I checked into the hall, but later on it's like, oh, I never did solve the mystery after all because it turns out I had never gotten out of the chair. Boom, 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 boom. You know, you can't get away with that stuff. As a matter of fact, you know, any reader is immediately going to say, okay, you just wasted my time. And in any entertainment medium, I think the thing you absolutely owe your reader or your audience is that you don't waste their time. You entertain them, maybe you inform them, possibly you enlighten them, but they stay interested in your story and don't feel cheated at the end of it. And that's what you're hoping with this and with better. You look like you want to ask a question. Or are you just trying to look insightful? And,
several questions on my phone.
Okay, all right. And this is basically the craft of writing stories. Is you pick little isolated moments in time and you show those and trust your skill, your deftness as a writer to pick the essential things that have to be told so that the reader has enough material to do his part of the story, and then together you reach a successful conclusion of the story. But in this case, of course, you have an artist along the way that needs to know what you have in mind so that he can do his part of doing just that. If you have the same sequence where 3 pages into it, you still have the guy holstering his gun and getting on his horse and you know, tightening the stirrups or whatever. I just revealed, by the way, that I have no idea how getting on a horse actually works. But and then riding off, your reader is going to be like, you know, do I need all this? You know, after he shoots the guy, it's a cowboy thing. I know he's got a horse, and we could have gone straight to the ride over the ridge unless there's something essential, you know, there. But now let's back up and take the same situation, and let's say that the da-da-da moment of this is the next time the bad guy encounters a guy, he draws his gun and his gun's empty. And that's kind of like the big thing, like, oh, I forgot to reload my gun. Then, of course, since that's an essential story element, you'll want to see, after he shoots the guy, and you'll probably want to see that he plugs him at least 6 times, because everyone, or at least most audience members, know that there was 6 guns back then, and holsters his weapon without putting the bullets in, because that's essential information for the moment later. So you might want to actually have to risk, you know, keeping your reader engaged in this little moment longer than he thinks is necessary, just so that later on, when you have the big reveal, it's not a cheat. That he can look at, okay, all right, he played fair with me. I saw the entire thing, that he never reloaded his gun. But that's, you know, the only time I think that you want to risk putting in extraneous information.
Where do you want to mislead the audience?
Pardon me?
Where do you deliberately want to mislead the audience?
That's a good question. There are times when you want to mislead the audience, and there's ways to do it legitimately, and there's ways to cheat. How many of you read whodunits? A type of mystery fiction where it's called a fair play mystery, where the detective in a mystery is really the reader's stand-in. He represents the reader's interests all throughout the story. And you know, like Ellery Queen, Alex White, whodunit is a colloquial term for mysteries wherein you, the reader, have to try and figure out the mystery. And the rules in whodunits, for example, are that before the detective gets to the point where he says, aha, I figured out who done it, hence the name, and how it was done, the reader has a fair chance to have come up with the same solution, which means you, the writer, have to put in all the different clues that the detective will eventually call back and say, because this happened and this didn't happen, and all this, I figured out that you're the killer. So you're not even paying attention. I just said that you're the killer, and you're just unfazed by it. So he's not only a killer, he's a complete psycho killer. He's like, yeah, I don't care. I just like killing. But, all right. So let's say you're writing a whodunit, and you have the detective finally do is, I figured it out. I figured out the mystery, and you as the reader are going, my God, I've got some of the clues, and I probably missed some others, but boy, I'm not having a clue. And then the detective says, I figured out that he is the killer because the killer was seen by a witness to be wearing a blue t-shirt. And this is the only blue t-shirt in the entire land of England. And there's a demo one. And then you as a reader's like, well, wait a minute. Nowhere in the novel did you say there was a witness that saw that the guy had on a blue t-shirt. So you just cheated. I mean, now that is intentionally deceiving the audience, the readership, because the guy's not a very good writer and he needed it, and I can't figure out a good mystery. I'll just have this, but it kind of sounds like something Sherlock Holmes would say, that he had this, and the killer only drove Cadillacs, and et cetera, et cetera. You need to put that information in to be a fair play story. That's cheap. That's deceiving your audience in ways that is absolutely unfair to them because you didn't give them the fair information. But there are ways you do want to occasionally cheat or occasionally withhold information from your reader or make your reader think one thing and then find out another. I'm going to do something that's rather vulgar for any kind of teacher of writing to do, which is refer back to my own work. I apologize for this, but this is what comes to mind, which is an example of what I consider fair misleading of the readership, which is, by the way, I'm about to give something away from Fables. If you have not read Fables yet, you're about to possibly get something spoiled, but I'll try and leave out as much context as possible. But there was this scene where I decided to intentionally make the readers believe that the character they're following was the character Boy Blue. Boy Blue is this character from the nursery rhyme, Little Boy Blue, Come Blow Your Horn. Well, in Fables, he's an action-adventure hero. He's swashbuckler. He's devil-may-care. He's Errol Flynn. Errol Flynn only wished he could be this dashing incumbent. And Boy Blue was on his way to kill the main villain. And we showed this, and we've established that he was going to find some way to sneak into the Imperial City to kill the villain. We'd already also established that he had several magical powers at his behest, including the power because he was wearing a magical cloak that made him be able to look like pretty much anyone he wanted. So we opened the issue with this fellow who looked very much like Boy Blue riding into town. Boy Blue had blonde hair. He had slightly reddish ginger hair. I think he had a goatee and a mustache. And he was wearing an imperial uniform. But he looked just like Boy Blue, so like that.
Just like that.
And what I was doing was being evil with my readers because it was purposely set up for the readers to think, okay, they've just read the previous story, they know Boy Blue wants to infiltrate the city, this is obviously him. All right, there he is. Can everyone see this? All right, yeah.
What volume is that?
This is Homelands, yeah, line 60. So this is playing some fun with the readers. A little misdirection, and misdirection in stories is fine, as long as it's fair, and we'll discuss why I hope this is fair. So we follow this guy, and he says that he's a brand new guy in the guard force. He reports for duty, and his duty happens to be one of the guys that's supposed to be guarding the Emperor on a special day. And so all the readers know, it's like, okay, Boy Blue is getting close, he's going to strike, etc., etc. And then we have one of the villainesses, the Snow Queen, show up on this special day and say, uh-oh, I just did a magical thing and I detect that there's an intruder here. amongst us and look around and see anyone that you don't know. I mean, any strangers or anyone that just showed up today and all this kind of stuff. And so this guy's captain looks at this character and says, well, you just showed up today, and I don't know you, and you never did show me your orders. And the guy said, well, I tried to show you my orders. He said, there's no time. And the guy gets killed, and then we find out that one of the other brand new strangers in the room is Boy Blue. And this is just a poor schmuck that happened to, by a cruel twist of fate, resemble Boy Blue just enough to where he died, and the real character revealed himself. The reason that's not a cheat, one hopes, is that at no time did your writer say, this is Boy Blue. Hopefully we just definitely let you come to that conclusion, but then we got to do it's not this, it's this. Look at this sleight of hand. I just pulled a rabbit out of the hat, aren't you impressed? Kind of moment. And hopefully that was fun and exciting. And that is definitely a way I withheld lots and lots of information from the reader so that I could get to that moment. But when the moment occurs, you look at it and say, okay, you're right. Never said that was Boy Blue. Plus, he established that Boy Blue could look like an old cleaning lady if he wanted to. So, he played fair. Not the same, one is a sin, one is a cheat, one is hopefully a good thing that the reader will say, okay, you put one over on me. Although, many readers said, oh, Bill, you jerk. I'm not falling for any of your crap anymore if you're going to do that kind of stuff. So that kind of thing is a...
That's okay. We're the Schmucks family.
Yeah, okay. Did I answer your question?
Yeah.
All right, good. By the way, does anyone? I don't have the time. I have plenty of time. I have all the time you need.
Okay.
If I were a detective, the fact that I didn't notice that it's a clock that's as big as, well, my regrets just hanging over my head would probably not shed too much glory on me at the moment. But my Boy Scout skills having been restored, I suspect that we're about halfway through this. So these are the bare bones of what I wanted to communicate. The sort of the things you have to look out for. And I'm one of those who believe that it's really hard to teach how to write. So the best you should do or can do with writers is to teach them, here are some things that I learned at my peril to avoid, so maybe you can avoid them without going through this. And I've covered the big one. There's endless variations on the you're asking too much of your artist type of things that we could go into. There are endless variations on the things you should learn to cut out of your scripts and what you should. But those are the bare bones. And I can go into more of the details, but before I do that, why don't I throw it open to you folks if there are things you came in here hoping to get out of this that I haven't even touched on yet. Is there anything like that? I was hoping that I was so erudite as a teacher that I had already covered anything you could possibly want, and yet that's not the case. Yeah?
Welcome to Israel. Sci-fi community.
Ah, okay. So, what else are you hoping to get out of this class that maybe I can touch on?
Well, one of the most difficult things for me to do is to transfer the idea I have in my head to the paper, or transfer my idea into words or to a picture.
Uh-huh.
So, do you have any suggestions on how to make that easy?
Sure. First of all, things I do, and what I mean by suggestions is I can never be the comprehensive, here's everything you need to know about everything kind of teacher. But what I can do is kind of point out, here's some things that I learned that work for me. So I'm going to do that. One of the things I try to figure out, and and this occurs in the writing stage or in the thinking about writing stage, which is this mostly an action kind of story, or is it mostly talking heads, which is our shorthand for people in a room discussing things. And if it's talking heads, if it's Bigby finally professing his love for Snow White, for example, where, it is important what's happening on the page too. Then we see that they're going to the forest and trying to escape from the bad guy. But more important than that is, this is it. This is where Bigby's finally laying his cards on the table, for example. Then I will do dialogue first. I will just keep the imagery out of it and just say, okay, write what they say to each other. Don't worry about panels. Just don't even think about that. Just get the gist of what he says to her and she says to him down first, and then and I'm assuming that me at this stage is having trouble kind of figuring out the scene. Maybe that kind of kicks loose that logjam of, now that I've got what they're saying, I can start to visualize in what way they're saying this type of thing. In other words, break it down to manageable parts. Like when you hear marathon runners talk about how they did what they did, you'll find that during the actual running, which if you run that long, it's no longer a case of, you need to be in shape and all that, but it's not a physical ability, it's your will. You have the will to do it. And they say that one of the common tricks they use is they don't think that, okay, I've got 11 miles to the finish line. They think, I can make it to that signpost there. I can make it that far. And then when they get to that signpost there, they say, well, I can make it to that curve in the road there. And they do it in manageable mental increments. And maybe that's what you do, is that you don't think in terms of, I can't do this because I've got to be able to do this and this, and it's all not working, but I can do this much. I can at least get the dialogue between them down. And then go back, and there's a few mechanical things you can do. One of the things in writing comics is only a certain amount of dialogue can be done in a certain panel, or else you have this panel of this giant word balloon with this tiny little head down in the corner of it, so that you see who's speaking. And that's a terrible, terrible panel. Do you guys get the comic strip Tank McNamara over here? Have you ever heard of it? It's like a gag, you know what a gag-a-day is, like Sunday Funnies, it's like 3 panels. It's a gag-a-day strip about this sports reporter named Tank McNamara. He's an ex-sports jock and now he's a reporter. And the artist of that, and the letterer is the guy that actually writes the letters on the page, was a fellow named Bill Hines, who kind of looked like Tank McNamara, but that's not the point. But he worked with a writer, whose name escapes me right now, that would often write so much dialogue in a panel that Bill Hines would have lots of trouble trying to find ways to fit the picture in there. So one week for the comic strip, he had Tank McNamara doing his report, and the writer had just been blathering on and on and on. And he starts out in the first panel just standing up there doing the sports report, and you have the word balloon over the head when he's talking. And in the second panel, the word balloon is just a little bigger, and you have Tank McNamara kind of ducking a little bit. And in the third panel, he's ducking a little more. By the end of the strip, it's just a little head, not even a whole head. You see his eyes peeking up, and the entire word balloon over there, which is not what the writer intended. The joke was supposed to be in the dialogue, and Bill Hines, that rat, played a snarky little thing about the writer, about you crowded me out too much. I've complained, and now it got printed like this. So finally the writer, okay, fine, you could have told me, but I told you. And he started to dial that. Now, I told you all of that to tell you this, that once you've written the dialogue, and you just do it as a play, and not even think it like a comic book, then you can go back and start thinking like a comic book. It's like, well, these 2 lines can fit in one panel, but not these 3 lines. So that's going to be one panel, which means this line, well, that's kind of a long speed, so that's just going to be one panel. And then you start just structurally blocking it off like that. And then you've got your dialogue and how many panels you've got. And then it's a fairly easy matter to, okay, well, this is what happens in this panel, this is what happens in this, this is what happens in this. So you break it down into manageable parts. Or you could go the other way and just write, let's say it's an action scene, a car chase, or something like that. It's like, okay, we see the car coming around the bank. Okay, now the car is screaming down the interstate. Okay, now the car has reached the bridge and the police cars are chasing and shooting at them. And you just say what happens in the panels and then go back and decide if there's any dialogue that goes with it. But you do it in increments. And the other thing you do, and this is the wonderful part about this kind of writing. I'm talking about all the terrible aspects of the mistakes you can make and all this kind of stuff. But the wonderful part is if you're working with a good artist, you can say things like, the police car comes screaming around the corner, and that's what you have to write. And the artist will figure out how to communicate that, because the bulk of the storytelling is him. So you've got that going for you. There is a wonderful anecdote that Warren Ellis tells us. Warren Ellis is a very popular writer of comics, and he writes big scope, big epic stuff. He writes things like, 1,000 million superpowered guys zooming in to destroy a city, and gets it all, big epic splash pages and double page spreads, which are our term for, big full double, one panel that is over like multiple pages. And he did one of those that was a giant space battle and things happening and pardon me?
What, in the Lord?
This was, it was with Hitch, so it was probably Authority. But things burning out of the sky, etc., etc. And someone asked them, okay, this was a magnificent double-page spread. There was so much going on. Spaceships. No, it was the Ultimates. It was the alien invaders versus the SHIELD helicarrier. Anyway, there were planes burning out of the sky, etc., etc. And someone asked him, so how much of that did you actually write? Because it was just this epic battle and this 2 pages and just everything you could imagine was there. And he quoted from the script for those 2 pages. And all it said was 3 words: the fleet's engaged. That's it. 3 words. And one of the dirty little secrets about comic writing is that you get paid per page. So he got his entire page rate for 2 pages, basically a word and a half per page for his incredibly enormous page rate. So he was getting maybe a little more than $100 a word, probably $150 a word. Not bad.
At all.
Think what would happen if you write day 5?
There you go. But that's an example of one of the things you've got going for you is you can trust your artist to take what you need to tell them and interpret it. And you can also probably trust your artist that if you hadn't written enough, that he will get on the phone. I happen to know that you folks just love your phones here. What is it, 4 million people in the country and 7 million phones? I mean, what is that about? That is just ridiculous. You people are just dial it back, so to speak. Anyway, no. People get on the phone.
Stop ringing when you give your speech in Pacific. Just wait.
Okay.
Yeah.
He'll get on the phone and let you know that he doesn't have enough information. So that's a way for you to go. You've got a kind of backstop there. But Orson Scott Card once gave some wonderful advice that absolutely I believe the same problem you're talking about, which I just couldn't, I knew what I wanted, but I couldn't get it down on the page. And it wasn't a comics-related thing, because I pretty much figured out comics, I hope, on how to write this in years, but I was, I want the new challenges, so I'm working in prose more. And there were times I just, I couldn't quite get what I wanted to say down on the page, and he was answering someone else's question on his website that wrote in much the same thing. I think he was asking the questioner was asking about my style. He was worried about my style, And Orson Scott Card's answer was, don't worry about your style. Don't worry about the artistry of your prose. Just say what happened. If you get used to saying what happened in as clear and simple a way as possible, eventually whatever comes out of it will be your style. And so that's not something you have to figure out. That will happen as a result. But then he went back and clarified it. If you're having trouble with a scene, like you just wrote the most wonderful scene about the femme fatale who went up the mountainside with the vampire kid, and he exposed himself to the sunlight, and we found out this is why vampires never love the sunlight, is they get even more gorgeous and sparkly when they're in the gloom. And to save humanity from just this much sparkly gorgeousness, we stayed. And you wrote this wonderful scene. And then you have another scene that you really know what you want to do, which is the argument she has with her dad, the sheriff, about why she shouldn't be able to stay out all night with her lovely, sparkly boyfriend. But you have that little section in between that's just kicking your ass. Pardon my earthy language. I can't quite get her down off the mountaintop, back in school to pick up her book bag and get home in time for dinner to have her argument with her dad. And you kind of need at least some of that for the reader. What do I do? And I can't get it. I cannot get what that is on the page. And he says, you know what you do if you're having trouble with that is you just say, in as clear as possible, in as terse, just almost like notes to yourself. She goes down off the mountaintop, she goes home, has dinner, and then her dad shows up. You just put in the minimum amount you need to bridge that area, and often that will break the logjam in your mind. And then you write the rest of your wonderful novel that you're going to make billions of dollars with and make young girls the world over go. But just before you're sending it off, you need to finally, fix that scene. Well, you don't have that white page of I just can't get it. You've got it down. You could even hand it in like that if you had to, and have your editor say, can we kind of flesh this one little piece out a bit? And if your editor doesn't call back and say that, maybe that's enough. Maybe you've done enough. But it's just the basic stuff, and maybe you have her. Okay, she walked down out of the mountain and started to feel chilly, or you just add little bits, and it's not a big thing. It's never a big thing because you're just you're not writing the whole novel later. You just add a little bit. On the drive home, she picked her nose and wiped it off on the seat next to her. So just little character, whatever. But you see what I'm getting at is that you reduce it to component parts and make it not a big struggle, because I think what's happening in your mind is you're allowing yourself to think about the enormity of it and the responsibility and the I can't do this starts creeping in, which is not true. You can't. It's just if you have a scene, you want to write a comic, and it's like I can't quite write the panel description, but I know that it takes place at sunset and there's a ship on the water. Say sunset, ship on the water. That's it. And you move on. Have I answered your question?
Yes.
All right. We'll get to you, but there was one back there.
He was first.
No, you raised your hand the first time I asked him. Anyway, go ahead. I'm trying to be fair.
How much creative thinking is, what do you phrase? How much?
No, I understand.
I just offered to translate it.
Okay.
How much creative thinking is it okay to expect your artist to come up with? I mean, can I tell my artist I want this person to have exactly 26 freckles on her nose, or can I be vague about it?
Perfect question. And the answer is it depends. First of all, let's say you've been working with the artist for 12 issues and you know what he or she is capable of doing. You guys are simpatico with each other. It's me and Mark Buckingham. just like, if I say I need a gloomy castle in the night, I just know that he's going to draw the epitome of the gloomiest castle in the night. If there's that trust there, then you don't have to put much. If, on the other hand, let's say you're Alan Moore. In my life, I drew one Alan Moore comic, and it was a 7-issue comic. It was a Green Lantern story, Tales of the Green Lantern story. It was called the F-sharp bell, the Green Lantern that has no sight, so that he could not think in visual terms. He needed to think in sound terms. Anyway, it was a 7-page story, and the script for this 7-page story was about that thick of single-spaced typewritten pages. Because his description of the very first panel went something like this. Okay, I sat down at the old typewriter and I got my ciggies next to my typewriter and I got a mug of the, and then he described the brand of the tea and all this kind of stuff at hand, and I'm comfortable and I've got a nice clean page of 20-pound cotton white in the old carriage, and I'm ready to go. And that was his opening line. And that was, he went on like that. Information I didn't need, but it was delightful to read. But it was information I didn't read. And then he went on and on and on and on. 2 pages into the script, he started to actually describe what he needed in the first panel. That was fine, because by then everyone had seen Dave Gibbons' kind of special thing, a story about Watchmen in the Comics Journal, where he showed a typical section of Alan Moore's script, and his trick was, of course, to read it with a highlighter in his hand and actually highlight those very few things that he actually needed to pay attention to, and that the rest was all, so that he read it for pleasure, highlighting along the way, and then he went back and oh, this is what I've actually been drawing. So your artist will be very forgiving. If you give too much information, even the first-time artists will instinctively, for self-preservational purposes and nothing else, start to pare it down to what is it I need from this. I have the philosophy, and I don't know that it's the right way to do it, it's just my way to do it. I haven't in times worked with lazy artists before that won't give you but a fraction of what you ask for, so you try and fool them. And by the way, when I say that, I was that lazy artist, so, pardon me?
I thought lazy artists referred to minimalist.
Yes, I was the minimalist. Well, look at me, I can't really claim to be minimal much. But anyway, I was that guy, but my philosophy was, if you need this much vital stuff, this much stuff that has to be in there, then maybe if you ask for this much stuff, and the artist instinctively does what they do, those craven bastards, which is only give you half of what you asked for, then he'll pare it down and you'll actually get the amount you needed all along. That wonderful line from Seven Samurai, which is, we asked you to go hire 3 samurai to guard the village, and you brought 7. And he said, well, I actually kind of wanted 7, but I knew if I asked for 7, you'd bring 20. So I got the amount I wanted. You can anticipate maybe what the artist will give versus what you ask for. The other thing you do, and then there's another philosophy, which is, we'll call it the Warren Ellis philosophy, or I think it was Warren Ellis, where he says the fleet's engaged because he asks for the minimal, knowing that the artist will just give everything that's in his tortured soul and just bleed onto the page for him. You can go that way and just ask for a little and trust your artist and just give a lot. Your artist is one of the storytellers. Let me do a little digression here, because one of the things I hate in the comics world is when you get to the credits and they list the writer as author and the penciler as illustrator, whatever like that. The writer's not the author of the story. The artist isn't either. Together, you need both. The writer writes, the penciler draws, or the artist draws, but the authoring doesn't actually occur until both things are done. So that's just a little peccadillo of mine that I hate being referred to as a author of comics. If I write and draw my own comics, I'm but anyway. So yeah, use the writer. You're going to find that out. But here's the absolute rule. Let's say you needed that 27 freckles. Let's say that in the story later on, I'm not sure why, but let's just give it, that it's essential later on for something that's important that he has exactly 27 freckles because those are the 27 alien invaders that are hiding out in the forms of freckles on this guy's face. In that case, you say in the panel description, because remember, your panel description is only for one person, the artist. I mean, the editor reads it, etc., etc. The artist is who you're talking to. You don't need to keep him entertained. You just need to inform him. If you absolutely need those 27 freckles, then you say, so you write something like, and in this panel, we see a close-up version of Fred. And this is very important. You actually write down, this is very important. He has no more and no less than 27 freckles on his face. And that way, the artist will know that this is actually something that's important in the story. If
does the artist expect a certain amount of creative freedom?
Oh yeah. And in many comics, they call it the Marvel method because Marvel was the one who really pioneered this method. The artist doesn't get a script. He gets a description of what the script will eventually be. He gets a page that says, in this page they fight, and they fight for another 2 pages, and by the next page, it's revealed that Dr. Poopyhead is really the Super Skrull. Then in the next page, we switch scenes to Reed and Sue having date night up in the Baxter building, while Spider-Man is looking through the window and going, "Oh boy, I wish I had me some Sue store," etc. And then the next, and it's just a description, like, and then the artist just draws it from that, and he decides how many panels you need, and how it's paced, and what kind of things happen in that fight, and all this kind of stuff. And the artist basically tells the story based on kind of a description from the writer, and then the writer comes back after that. Only then does he make the final decisions on what's written, what's said in each panel. And that's a perfectly legitimate way to work. I don't like it because, for one thing, I am a lazy bastard, and that feels like writing it twice because I wrote it the first time for the artist, even though it was a brief description. But then he drew it, and I rewrite it the second time when I go over his pages and dialogue. And the other thing is it allows a lot of mischief in the sense that if it's not locked in, if it's just a description, sometimes the artist's like, yeah, well, I know we were supposed to have a space battle, but I was really into trains that day. I wanted to draw a train battle. So, yeah, the big conflict in space takes place on a train. Yeah. The pre-scroll war, instead of coming together in space and shooting it out, they decide to all get on the Philadelphia northbound and fight it out in the snack car. Because that's what I felt like drawing today. That happens. And it happens a lot when, the more freedom you allow the artist, because artists are superstitious and cowardly lots, and they should be chained down and forced to do what you want. That can happen. At the same time, when you do that, you can ask for certain things, and the artist will come up with something so glorious that it's just like, oh my God, I can't believe that, and you get these wonderful gifts. I do a full script, which means every line of dialogue is there to begin with before the artist sees it, and I do the panel descriptions that are this long, even though they probably need to be this long, and still Bucky surprises me, Mark Buckingham, by adding details that are just lovely and wonderful. I'll tell you one anecdote, probably the most famous bit of the artist giving the writer more than he asked for, which rippled through history, which is the famous issue of Fantastic Four. I don't remember the number. That's the first appearance of Galactus. And Stan Lee and Jack used to work in the Marvel method, which is Stan Lee kind of pitches a story, Jack draws it, and then Stan Lee actually writes it because, he just an idea. And apparently, issue by issue, these these descriptions of what should happen in this story have been getting smaller and smaller as Stan was writing, 4 issues a month, and then he's writing 12 issues a month, and he's also running the company. So by the time he got to the first appearance of Galactus, and he's wondering, like, okay, the Fantastic Four have defeated Submariner and Doctor Doom and a few others. It's like, God, what's left? I mean, they've faced every possible challenge. So his description to Jack is, okay, in this issue they fight God. I have no idea if that's just a funny anecdote or if that's indeed all he asked to describe. I want a 24, there were 24 pages then, 24-page story of the Fantastic Four fighting God. That's it. And he got the first appearance of Galactus. And but Jack drew it because he's a genius and he's a wonderful storyteller. So he wrote, and I think you can give him credit for writing in this case. Jack wrote and drew this wonderful issue of Fantastic Four where Galactus shows up, because in that one, Jack Kirby, that's what God looks like. Galactus, this giant purple suit. He's got a big G on his chest. I mean, his big kind of antennae coming out, the satellite receptors and things like that. And he's got this big helmet that goes far up above his head and closes off here because he likes cake and he can keep his cake moist in there and all that kind of stuff. Who knows? He creates Galactus, but at least Stan Lee asked for God and he got God. So that's one level. But in this issue, there was this weird little guy flying around on a flying surfboard in all this, and Stan Lee asked Jack, okay, who's this guy? Because Stan Lee's got to script it now. And Jack said, well, if God shows up, he should have at least one angel with him. And this is his idea of God's angel, his herald. God doesn't show up unless an angel shows up first and say, by the way, I think you should know God's on his way. It's just he's parking the car, he's coming, you should get ready, and etc. He just created the Silver Surfer just because he thought, God shows up, he should have some staff. And of course, one of the most recognized and beloved characters in Marvel history. So your artists will often just do wonderful creative things, and you can either be the writer that says no, I had a very specific thing in mind, and you will, or you can say like, oh, this is wonderful, I'm somehow going to work this into it. And there's possibly inappropriate things. If you're doing a love story between two people, a very mundane, heartbreaking love story, and the artist decided, there was a lot of scenes about them on dates and stuff like that, but how cool would it be with a love story, but also she has a magic lump? Or Pikachu. I'm not sure what that animal is, but I just felt like drawing a magic glowy animal. Sometimes you don't want the artist to take those steps, but you find that balance. As a general rule, let him shine. Let him contribute as much to the story as he wants to do. And once again, he will let you know, because the default setting on all artists, and I'm speaking as one, as like the most guilty one, is lazy. So if you're asking for too much, if you're leaving too much in his hands, he will let you know. Find a way to